Hello everyone, welcome to another Quality Advocates event. Thanks for coming along. It's nice to see so many familiar names pop up. Really pleased to welcome Jitesh to the Quality Advocates speaking group, where he's going to be talking around whether or not a test pyramid can be used as a test strategy. He's got a really interesting talk lined up, so please you could all come along and hopefully you can help use this within your workplace. Jitesh, if you're free, it'd be great for you to kick us off.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Billy, and thanks for kind of inviting me to talk and present at Quality Advocates. Really appreciate that. I guess, yeah, and thanks to all the attendees for joining in this discussion. So looking forward to lots of kind of interactive questions as we go along the presentation. So don't hesitate to either just pipe up or drop a question in chat, and let's make this interactive and make sure that you have some clear takeaways from today's talk. But as you can see from the word cloud, the question I wanted to pose is, I mean, what problems do people see the test strategy solving? And we can also see that there's a number of goals out here, everything from communication, vision, risks. It's interesting when I really like it, it stops arguments. But I'll kick off with a story where almost the strategy kicked off an argument rather than stop an argument. So that's, I guess that's the purpose of a strategy, to help us kind of communicate and align. So let's move on. There we go. Okay. So actually, before I kick off the presentation, I just wanted to share a short story about. I guess the setting here is a large bank kind of engaged me in a previous life where I was a consultant, and the idea was that they wanted to revamp the mortgage system, and the problem with the mortgage system was that it took them about 6 to 9 months to launch new products, and with the new competitors in the market, the challenger banks and so on, they're able to launch products within weeks and sometimes even days. So of course, you can see some of the legacy banks were finding it increasingly challenging to compete with them. So here we are, we were hired as a team to come in, look at the systems, and of course, the immediate challenge is documentation was limited, and no fault of their own, but actually some of these systems were over 20 years old, and documentation wasn't up to date. People have moved on, technology's moved on. So we kind of spent 3 months on discovery of just understanding what the system was doing. And my role in this as a test architect was to work out how we're going to test this thing and how we're going to ensure that the overall outcome of the ability to launch a mortgage product within 6 weeks was achieved. So here I go off and in true fashion, producing a very heavy document about a strategy, numerous slides, to convince the leadership management to invest further in our project so that we can deliver the system. You can imagine my challenge is, we've developed a test strategy document. Convincing everybody around us that this is the right thing to do is an immense journey. But what was even more difficult is when we then started to hire in teams to build these systems, the constant challenge of, well, Jitesh, why have you done it this way, not that way? And I almost had to keep on repeating the story over and over again. And sometimes, I would even challenge them to say, have you not read my document? And I said, well, yeah, but it's rather lengthy. Just tell me the bits that I'm interested in. And I said, well, no, you kind of need to understand the strategy and the goal, where we're going, and then work out, for example, what infrastructure we need, what tooling we need, how are we going to segregate the tests and so on. But of course, I realized my problem therein, which was, you needed to take people on a journey, not just involve them at the end in terms of, well, here's a strategy, go and enact it. People need to be taken on a journey, and that was the main point. But of course, as in the wider scheme of things, the financial crisis came along and put a complete stop to our project, and it was put on the back burner. And I guess another lesson learned is, if we had done this in a more iterative fashion, where we were learning about testing, as well as, the software architect was learning about the architecture, the BAs were producing the journeys, and also we were delivering in an iterative manner, A, the bank would have got some real value out of it. B, from a testing perspective, the journey would have been so much more easier. And of course, the test strategy, I was constantly updating the 30-page kind of test strategy, the slides, and my life just became a documenter, a slide monkey, and that wasn't a good use of time. But here we are. It's a new world now, and we have kind of modern test practices which help us solve this problem. But I thought I'd share that in the sense that test strategy has evolved so much from the days that we produce huge documents to now where we're looking to produce much more lighter frameworks, much more live documents, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, just quickly, my bio. I had the kind of fortune or misfortune to start my testing journey on blue screens, manual testing, system called Tandem, if people are familiar with that. And just testing batch processes, and those were the days. And one of my first jobs, I remember my manager telling me that you're working on systems that cannot fail. So systems like Euroclear, continuous link settlement. So CLS in particular settled at that time around $3 trillion daily in foreign exchange. And you can imagine if a bug appeared on that system which failed to settle a number of transactions, there would be some sort of systematic failure throughout the whole chain. So that's where I built my knowledge, and almost people telling me you cannot fail, take time, and almost testers had the ability to stop releases into production. I had that stark contrast change where I then joined a startup where almost we were taking risks daily. We didn't have the luxury of people, time, cost, resources to test as much as we could. So it's almost taking a completely risk-based approach to say, well, just test it to make sure it works, the basic works, and put it into production. I spent then around 7 years in consulting, almost on a replay, kind of replay record where I'm advising clients about test strategies, how to drive efficiencies, automation, and the likes. And then more recently, working for unicorns like ASOS and Just Eat. But more recently, I've been doing more advisory consulting work, almost coaching future test leaders, and just working on new ideas and presenting like I'm doing now. So that's enough of me. So today, what I would like to go through is kind of just set the scene first on test strategy, the outcomes we want from it, talk a little bit about the test pyramid and the history where it comes from, but then also leave you with a framework of how you can take this back into organizations and almost apply the pyramid and derive a strategy, which is almost living and breathing day in, day out. So that's the plan today. Just a quick sense check. Can people hear me? Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. Excellent. So let's just get everybody on the same page, because I think what I find is terminology is always a problem, and everybody understands these words slightly differently. So, what I've taken is strategy from our Oxford Dictionary, and it describes it as a plan of action designed to achieve a long-term or overall aim. Now, what does this mean in engineering terms? So the aim is, we need a goal to shoot for. We need an end state. And from a testing perspective, it's, I'd like all software to travel through these testing checkpoints. I'd like to have this many number of perhaps P1, severity 1 defects in production, kind of the SLAs. But also we need to know when we've achieved the strategy, when we've achieved the goal. So we kind of need some criteria to measure to help us achieve that, or to help us at least understand that we've achieved the goal. And of course, we need a set of steps to help us achieve that. So it's, in a way, the strategy is, a goal that we need to hit, measurable criteria, and a set of steps. But what this doesn't really capture for me is pretty fundamental in terms of we are constantly making decisions of what to do and what not to do. What's the trade-off? And as somebody mentioned, in the cloud, what's the risk associated with that? So a strategy is also about making a set of choices what we will do, and more importantly, what we won't do, and the trade-off associated with that. And in our language, it's a risk of not doing a certain type of activity, a certain type of test. Let me then turn my kind of eye to testing. Again, the dictionary term here is, it's a critical examination or trial of a thing's qualities. And of course, a thing can be a website, an app, a service, a program, a batch program, whatever you want to take it. But I also liked, as I read further down in the dictionary, it had this chemical description for chemistry-related matters, and it said it's a procedure employed to reveal the presence of another in a compound. And I guess immediately what sprang to my mind is, that's a bug. That's a foreign compound that shouldn't be there. And in our terminology, that's a bug that shouldn't be there. But I thought these two kind of descriptions kind of really articulate well what testing is all about. Again, just translating that into engineering terms, it's, the qualities are tangible attributes or characteristics which we can measure. Now, whether that's performance, accessibility, functional, it's a quality that we have to ensure that it's met. And how do we do that? We do a critical examination of it, which is, how does this thing perform under certain situations, under certain trials, and what are its merits and faults? What happens if it goes wrong? But that's, in essence, what testing is. So now, let me bring this together in terms of what is a test strategy. Now, I see this as a plan of action designed to achieve the desired quality attributes through critical examination and trials. And ultimately, that encapsulates what I'm going to talk about today. It's, what is our plan of action that will help us achieve a certain level of quality? And have you even articulated what that certain level of quality is? And then once you've done that, what is the critical examinations that we're going to do? Whether it's through the pipeline, whether it's manual, whether it's automated, what is it that we're going to do critically, and what trials are we going to put that software through, which will help us measure the desired qualities? So I then question, and an open question to the group before we move on, isn't this a quality strategy? Delivering quality outcomes, for the stakeholders that engage with? Why are we calling this a test strategy? And I suspect I'll open up a debate, which probably is for another day, but I'm seeing this very much as a quality strategy rather than a test strategy, simply because we are measuring or we're driving towards desired outcomes, desired quality outcomes. Let me take a pause there and take in any questions so far before I move on. Anything? Let me just open up my chat. Any questions? Is everybody happy with my definition of a test strategy? Anybody want to challenge or discuss? Okay, I will move on. Thanks, Denise. So let me talk about quality outcomes, and let me ask, for whom? Who are we delivering these quality outcomes to? And I like Jerry Weinberg's kind of analogy here. It's, quality is value to some person, and that person whose opinion matters to us. Now, always, we tend to put that customer as, that person as a customer, the customer who's a paying customer. And this particular example I'm going to use is from a retailer. So those are people that buy products from the retailer. They're perhaps the people who put products on a certain website, so they're the guys who are selling or making the jeans, the trainers, and so on. And of course, there's another customer here is when I order something, from Amazon.com, there's a third party to this, which is a courier who delivers that product to me. But of course, there will be other outward-facing people that we define as customers or consumers. But what we tend to forget is, more importantly, the inward customers. So the examples I'll use here is, the customer care team. And, I often I complain to the customer, or complain as a customer to the retailer to say, where's my product? Or the product is not as it's described. And sometimes as well, the app crashed and I was putting the order through, the payment's gone, but I'm not seeing the order. Now, what's worse for a customer care is, hearing things like, well, it just crashed. There was no error number, no log, and the customer care individual then really struggles to manage that kind of incident. You've got service operations guys who are keeping an eye on the systems, and if they don't know when systems are creaking, or they need, perhaps infrastructure needs to be scaled up, they will struggle. Our sales guys, they need to know what's selling, what's not selling, so that they're able to kind of amend inventory. Onboarding, onboarding in terms of new retailers, new sales individuals, how are they able to onboard them onto our systems? And of course, I guess the most important of all, inward customer, is our C-level. What kind of data do we need to provide them that tell us our systems are running as expected? They're able to cope with the volumes. The other side of the equation, of course, is this is how much it's costing to run the infrastructure. So all of these guys are interested in the quality outcomes, but from different angles. And the last, most importantly of all, is ourselves as engineers. Often I see, when I'm pairing with a developer, I'm looking at, what does this piece of code do? It's really hard to read. It's quite hard to maintain. And equally, when you look at tests, it's like, what's the purpose of this test? What's the value it adds? So thinking about this as the next engineer that comes into our team, how easy is it for them to join us as a contributing member, and produce and interact with code? And if it's hard, we kind of haven't done justice to ourselves as engineers. And ideally, we want code that's maintainable, readable, easy to update, extensible, and so on. And if you don't do that, we failed inwardly in our quality. Does that make sense? Perfect. Okay. Let's move on. So in terms of the outcomes, so there's these kind of quality outcomes we want for these individuals whose opinion matters to us. So how can the pyramid help us deliver this, and for all these stakeholders? So before I dive in, so actually, let me just pause it. There's a few questions from Aurelian there. Is a continuous delivery plan a test strategy for you? No. And Aurelian, I will answer that question. There's a slide coming up which will tackle that question for you. So hold that thought. So, okay, so we've got a number of stakeholders. They want different things out of the pyramid, and how do we achieve that? So let me move on to talking more about the pyramid. Now, you may know that this term was first coined by Michael Cohen in 2009 in his book Succeeding with Agile, and of course it's not a pyramid; it's a triangle, and there's we can have a debate about that as well. But in essence, it's he defined this as a pyramid, and in the simplest terms, he described it as UI, service, and unit, and he wanted people to think about what are the layers of testing that we should have when we're developing software. And almost, there's a huge debate about, well, actually, this is too simple because we have many layers, and just having an articulation in 3 layers is not really sufficient. But the principle and the ethos that Mike wanted to get across is we need to be thinking, and we need to be thinking structurally in the ways of how we go about testing things. Now, before the pyramid, and I guess, when I refer back to my mainframe testing, we used to use models like the V models, VNV, and so on. And they had its faults as well, but the main point was it helped us structure our thinking and our processes. So similarly, the test pyramid helps us think about what are the layers I need to really deliver the quality for the various stakeholders that I need to service. And also thinking about what is the right test at the right point, and do I have it at the right granular level? And naturally, you know, the tests at the top of the pyramid, the UI tests tend to be more fragile. The tests at the lower of the pyramid tend to be quicker, faster, have a faster feedback loop. So the point of the pyramid here is user principles, structure your thinking, define the layers with context of your domain, your business domain, your development domain, and then move it forward. So here's an extraction. And again, you know, the layers can go to many more, many less as you see fit. But let's say for the someone like Amazon, online retailers, you're kind of expecting units at the lower level. There's an integration element where perhaps two components are coming together. You then expose that through an API layer, but there's a number of APIs talking to each other. So you may want to do an enable layer, and then you've got the end-to-end, and then you've got the final exploratory layer at the top. I think this, as I said before, it's with context. Now, some let's say, for example, technologies or softwares, you know, APIs is the endpoint because you're providing APIs for other people to consume. So for your perspective, you don't have a UI, it's just an API service that you're consuming. Other teams or other organizations may say, actually, we don't have an integration layer. We just go from unit, expose an API, and off we go. Sometimes you make a conscious decision not to do a layer because of a variety of reasons, and I'll talk more about that as well. So let me talk more about then is, I'm a shop owner and I'm listing products on an e-commerce website like Amazon. You know, I want the ability to upload my inventory daily, quickly. I want to manage conflicts so that, you know, I can get my products to the customers as quickly as possible. You know, I'm a heavy API user, and I'll be checking that my products appear on the website. I'm not so concerned about the lower level test, you know, because for me, I want to see my products appear in you know, the inventory up to date. I want to be able to interact with my inventory and so on. You may then have the next, you know, another kind of inward customer, which I mentioned before, is as a service operator, I want to know what components are failing, or what components are close to their capacity, or their storage, or you know, their transaction throughput. So I can then perhaps recover them or scale them up in a timely manner, or I can put up a holding page. And in the current climate, especially, you know, if a lot of people have now moved online. For example, Zoom the other day kind of creaked and reached its capacity and well, stopped working for a while. As a service operator, I want to know that, so I can then interact with the system. I can put a holding page up. I can manage my customers, and I can recover. I want easy to understand errors. Do I really care about, you know, what unit testing engineers are doing? Not so much. You know, do I really care about whether the inventories are up to date? Yeah, but actually no. What my job is as a service operator is I want to make sure that the systems are running optimally. You know, all the services are there. There's no errors coming through, and if that's done, I'm a happy customer. I'm a happy inward customer. And then finally, as a budget holder, you know, I've got to fund all this. You know, how do I know the money I'm spending is at the right level? You know, do I need to invest in more performance testing? Do I need to invest in more end-to-end testing? So they want data-driven decisions. They want access to data, which then tells them that actually conversion failed. And why did conversion failed? Is because, you know, perhaps there was an issue with conversion and people were able to click through from, for example, Instagram to our product, or from an email shot that went out onto the inventory that needed to be bought. And if the C-level don't get that data, they can't, you know, align marketing strategies. They can't align mail shots, and you know, for them, they don't know what they're investing in. And my question then is, what kind of tests are they worried about? And in a way, from my perspective, they're looking for assurances throughout the pyramid. They want to know that systems won't fail. They want to know conversion is working, and almost then they delegate that power down to the test managers and so on. I can see there's a lot of chat going on. Let me. Unit level. Does anybody want to pipe up with a question? I know I'll struggle to flick between my screens. No, okay. So Gay's got a question. Where do you place testing the initial ideas and design in the model? It kind of looks like only deals with finished product. If you're talking about experimentation, then that whether you do that through an experimentation framework, I guess the principles still apply, which is how do you know that an idea will work? Is that what you mean? Okay, good. Can I suggest we come back to that question? Because I need a little bit more information on what's the question there. So from Anne Moore, design reviews, inspection and walkthrough are all unit levels and should be done initially, and later you do it, more chance of error cost increases. Of course, makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, let me move on. So here's, I'm going to take this a notch down a little bit more in detail. So in terms of a pyramid, it's also about articulating to the next level. Now, for our roles as test leaders, our job is to articulate a vision, but not just in kind of fluffy terms. It's, okay, this is where we need to be and why we need to be there and the value of this activity and test and layer. So here's a framework that I would use, and I've used a number of times, is for each layer, you need to understand what's the approach that we're taking here and why are we doing this and how are we going to do it. And for each layer, you need to then think about what's my environment going to be? What's the data I'm going to be using? What's the automation framework and tool I'll use? And how will that fit into the pipeline? How will that integrate with the branching framework? And each layer then needs to be thought about. And also, if you're thinking about, for example, consumer-driven contracts, we know we should have that when we have an API layer. But actually, you may not have the time and luxury to set up, for example, a Pack Broker or Joy, which is a similar framework, and so on. But then you may counter that with saying, actually, we've got an elaborate near-neighbor testing framework to go through the APIs and give us enough comfort for the moment. But the ability to articulate this table in this format, and for your team then to understand it and interact with it and put this into practice through a DevOps pipeline is fundamental. And my key kind of takeaway here is, if every member of your team is able to articulate this table and able to describe it, to say, right, we do consumer-driven contracts because we need API layers which need to be robust, and we have a producer and consumer, and we do it this way. Bang, because as that developer is then writing that code, they are already thinking about how are we going to test this? What are the contracts going to look like? And almost take a TDD-driven approach to writing code. And similarly, if the developer and engineers in the team know that these are the layers of testing and this is how it fits into the pipeline, they almost understand the strategy and they're kind of living and breathing with that day in, day out. Okay, I mean, this, you can call it as, I know this has been described as, when I presented, these are the different facets of the pyramid. Whilst these are the layers, environment is a facet of the pyramid, data, automation, tooling. Another description I've heard is system test types. So this is, the near neighbor is kind of integration testing, API system testing, and so on. But I think I come back to my earlier point, is align the terminology first, which I've tried to do earlier in the presentation, and then elaborate on this table. And the key point is, if everybody in the team understands this, one of the key outcomes of the test strategy, which we even picked up in the cloud, is communication, alignment. The vision is there. Now, of course, you can articulate this table, and not everything will be in place from day one. But that's okay, because you can then take the table to your leaders to say, in order for us to, for example, do kind of end-to-end testing, we need to invest in an integrated environment. We need tooling like Selenium. Perhaps we need a cloud infrastructure to help us do cross-device, cross-browser. This is the value that this layer of testing will give us. At the moment, it's not there, but the North Star vision is that we should have it, because it will help us pick up cross-browser, cross-device issues. It will help us do or pick up end-to-end integration issues that we haven't picked up before. But you can then present that as a gap and then as a vision to say, this is where we need to be. And in the grand scheme of things, you could almost overlay this with a SWOT analysis to say, well, this is where we are good at. Our API contracts are thoroughly tested. It's a strength. Our weakness is we don't do enough near neighbor or end to end. And the opportunities therein are, we need to be doing these in there. So when I presented it to leadership, a heat map out of this is something that they love, because they can see very clearly what layers are covered, what risk it mitigates, where the gaps are, what risks it highlights, and then develop that into a strategy plan, a roadmap of where the team and the organization need to be. Any questions? So Aurelian, PACT is a consumer-driven contract testing framework. Ping me afterwards, I'll share some links with you. Okay, I see there's a paragraph from Gear as well, but I'll read that in a minute. Keen to get this to the end. Okay, a little bit more practical in action. So let's say you've got two components here. Each of these components have a variety of unit tests or individual units that you're unit testing. So the first thing here is, are we all talking the same language? What is a unit test? What is an API kind of consumer-driven contract test? In this particular example also, this particular team called it adapter test. So adapter is anything that talk to the outside world. They called it an adapter test. And this is a really good example from a high-performing team, is when this team went into a discussion with their BAs and the product owners about what features they wanted to develop, they all talk the same language. It's like, well, we want our service to be doing this. And immediately, you didn't even have to prompt the team. The team were thinking about, is this service external facing? Yes, it is. What kind of security testing do you need done? Do you need kind of pen tests done? How are you going to secure that? Is sensitive data going to be traveled on this API? What protection do we need? So already they're talking the same language, and they're almost driving the design through test scenarios. And this was amazing to see, because the quality engineer on that team wasn't really just doing testing. He and she were driving the design and almost challenging the team to say, well, what would happen if somebody managed to get access to our data? Would it be logged? How would our service operators know that something bad's happened? And this all got translated into a BDD, ATD type scenario. The teams are all talking the same language. Quality and testing is driving design, and the testing that are implemented by the engineers, and the accountability fell on the individuals that wrote the code, but also then wrote the tests. And almost the quality engineer was used as a coach by the team to say, have you covered all the bases? What if this would happen? And that's where the quality engineer really added value, as opposed to just being a test monkey. Now, the other beautiful thing that kind of happened here is, as it went through the pipeline, it went through the layers of test. It went to the defined quality gates, which held the quality attributes kind of precious to it. Exploratory testing wasn't done at the pyramid at the top. Exploratory testing was done throughout the layers. You know, what we encouraged, and I still encourage, even at Justy and ASOS in my previous organizations, is, you know, if a developer's writing code, why aren't they picking up that code, whether it's on an app or a service? Why aren't they playing about with it to see how a customer would interact with it? So exploratory happened throughout the phase. And then again, the quality engineer is there as a coach to help the engineers in the wider team understand how they can do that. End-to-end tests were done by the team, by the PO, and more recently, we've engaged the crowd, and partly because the crowd is, there's a wider proliferation of devices and platforms, which internally was really hard to cover ourselves. But the key thing that we saw here is development of a culture, of a quality culture. You know, the accountability, which I mentioned, is right at the beginning, the engineers are involved in understanding what are the quality attributes we need the software to adhere to meet for us to you know, kind of get that software right in production. And this particular team was talking about it right at the beginning. It's like, okay, what are the security attributes we need? What are the performance attributes do we need? And have we designed it in the right way? You know, they talk to the level of, do we have the right tests to help us critically identify the metrics that we need? So hopefully that helps kind of bring it into perspective. It's, you know, the point, as I mentioned at the bottom there, is code follows the baked-in quality gates and attributes described in the test pyramid, which is essentially your test strategy. And if everybody in the team is following that, you know, people are living and breathing this test strategy, rather than, you know, in my example right at the beginning is, I'm almost a test police going around telling everybody, you haven't done what I said in my test strategy document, which nobody's ever read. Okay, so in the end, what we end up with is referring back to that grid. You've got a current state. This is where we are. This is what we're not doing. This is a trade-off of not doing that. And of course, organizations have a reason why we can't do that. And that often is cost, resource limiting. We also get a target state, which is, yes, we know we need to be doing, for example, consumer-driven contract tests. We know we need to be doing, we need to be better at cross-browser, cross-device testing. You know, developers will always admit that actually, yeah, I wish, you know, our unit testing coverage was better, and so on. But that's the North Star. That's the gap of where you are at the moment to where you need to be. What you also get is you get a shared understanding, which is, you know, as I say, is more important than almost writing it. Is everybody understands what is tested, where it's tested, how it's tested, and why it's tested. And the quality outcomes, which are the attributes that we're measuring, supports that. Additionally, we then understand what is not tested and the gaps and why. You associate this with the trade-off, the risk, and the cost, and think, this is our job as test leaders. We provide a strategy, we articulate a North Star vision. We then say, actually, if we don't do this, this will happen, but not in an alarming way. It's just, but that's reality in a business. We can't spend and invest money in everything. We can't test everything. So you articulate the trade-off, you know, following the pyramid, the risk and the cost, and then you articulate the vision in terms of, well, over the next year, if we got X, Y, and Z in place, it will reduce these type of issues. You have a roadmap, you have a test strategy, you have a vision. And I guess my final question here is, isn't that what we said a test strategy is? Articulating a goal, a vision, metrics, and how we get there. And haven't we just done that by walking through what we've just done here? The other benefits and the behaviors it drives is it's always current and live, simply by the engineers engaging with the pyramid of, okay, we're doing, like in my example is, if it's an API that we're exposing, what is the strategy here? It needs to be secure. Is it secure data? Okay, we need to make sure it's encrypted. They're almost following that in a process. And if we miss something, it's very easy to iteratively add that back into that that discussion right at the beginning to say, well, this is another quality attribute that we need to hit, because last time when we did this, we found this issue in production. We need to be better at that. So it's always current, it's always live, it's always learning in a practical way. And we hear this term, quality is a team problem, but actually this enables it. When you're talking right at the beginning about, okay, these are the attributes we have to hit, and then you're discussing as a team, how are we going to achieve that? Yeah, you're immediately sharing the problem, sharing the responsibility, and then that problem gets dealt with. So finally, now we've come to a point where the team understands the strategy, they understand the pyramid, they understand the gaps, they understand the risks, and when they're writing the code, very easily to tell the product owner, we don't have these type of tests. We know that it's a risk. Are you happy with that, or do you want us to invest 2 weeks developing this? And the product owner can then make that decision, that investment case decision. The work is prioritized in terms of addressing the gaps and risks. You can also then make proposal to leadership on the basis of that. Just like I mentioned, is if you want to solve this problem, it will take us this time. This is how it fits into the pyramid. You can either accept the risk or invest in it. It feeds into planning activities with clearly articulated benefits, and it's a living, evolving test strategy. I guess that's me, dot on 45 minutes. Happy to take any questions, any further kind of challenges. Let me jump over to chat. I guess, yeah, Billy, just some help in moderating the questions. I may have missed some from the chat.
Yeah, sure. So I think you could go over Ger's question. That would be great. You provided some sort of extra context as well, just to find out your thoughts on that.
Okay. So Aurelian, is a continuous delivery plan a test strategy for you? I don't think so. So continuous delivery is how we deliver software into production. Now, how do you articulate what are the quality attribute checkpoints throughout that? And if the delivery plan does articulate that, to say, okay, these are the checkpoints that we're doing across our pipeline, across our continuous delivery, then yes, it will meet that. But often what I find is the purpose of a continuous delivery plan is how can you deliver code as quickly as possible into production in a reproducible, stable manner, and often the focus of that isn't that kind of discussion is driven by DevOps engineers, and if the quality guys are involved, absolutely they will inject quality in there, but it doesn't mean that this is a strategy of how we will deliver or how we'll improve the quality aspects of our software. You almost need a separate kind of focus articulation, like the test pyramid, which tells you this is what we're testing, why we're testing it, where we're testing it. And sometimes that isn't part of your delivery plan. For example, exploratory testing, is that baked into a continuous delivery plan? Yeah, yes and no. It's almost a side activity that happens as part of the process, part of a manual process. Okay, the questions are coming in thick and fast. When is it worth to reevaluate the test strategy? That's from Ertikes. Constantly. If you're running sprints, a nice way is at the end of a sprint, you'll have a retro. And in that, the team should reflect on what went well, what didn't go well. And if they found that actually these particular tests are taking too long, or even thinking about, actually, we've duplicated our tests at various layers, you should be thinking about that to say, hey, how can we speed that up? How can we make sure that we're testing the right thing at the right point and continuously evolving? The other feedback, metric feedback you should have is from production. You have data in production which tells you what are the errors being logged, what are consumers unhappy about. I articulated the various inward and outward kind of stakeholders, getting feedback from them to say, are you happy? Does it meet your need? Should it be faster? Should it be, is it another quality attribute that's more important to you? And feeding that back in to your strategy. Hope that helps, Jitesh. So can you elaborate the hurdles you had in the past when using the test strategy as a quality strategy? Yes. So I guess there's two aspects here. One is, if you're a new team, you have the luxury of defining the pyramid, as well as, the software engineers, the architects will have the luxury of defining the architecture from scratch. So in that aspect, I wouldn't do it in isolation. I'd almost do that as a journey to say, guys, okay, we're developing a web app. I understand from the architecture that this is what it's going to look like. Can we start thinking about what are the quality attributes that we need out of this, and where can we validate that in our layers, and then how will we validate that? What tooling would we need? What data do we need to validate that? So almost using that grid to walk through the testing strategy in a huddle, and doing that iteratively, because engineers, I know there's always a myth that engineers don't like testing, but what I found is, when you involve them right earlier on, and somebody passionate is driving the discussion about testing, and almost educating the developers on, hey, wouldn't be great if you did it this way, because your code would be so much more quicker, and you'd have less iterations around that, less rework. And if you were to bake in these tests right at the beginning, it would help you validate that quality attribute. So that's kind of on a new team level. On a existing team level, I'd go back to the retro format to almost look at, what are you doing, and almost using the SWOT framework to say, okay, this is a strength. We've hardly found a problem here. Everybody is really on board with this. Whereas there's a weakness here, because this particular kind of test is fragile, keeps on failing, or actually we don't do this and we need to introduce it. So you bring that in the retro. You perhaps bring it with your Scrum Master, your product owners, raising that as a business case to invest in. So Gay's question, where do you place testing the initial ideas and designs in that model? It kind of looks like, I think, sorry, I'm just reading Gay's question. Oh, of course. Okay, I get it. So going back to my example about the three amigos, that's, where I've seen this working well is, the quality engineer, even the BA, is really coming in to challenge the way that we solve a problem. Now, ultimately, the engineering team is there to automate, or to write code to automate a problem. And the debate then ensues is, how are we going to automate this problem? And sometimes even, is it worth automating this problem? Because we'll spend, perhaps 2 sprints on automating this, where somebody manually can do this task in a couple of hours. So it's almost challenging that initial idea to say, what is the problem, and what's the value of that problem being solved? And then how do we solve it? What's the best design? What's the best architecture? And where I've seen it done really well comes to my concept of, the tests are driving the design. That almost people are thinking about, what's the easiest way to test this, and how can I make sure it's independent, it's quantifiable, it's measurable? And once that's there, the engineer finds it really easy to write that code and make that test pass in a kind of blue-green type way. So in that way, the initial ideas are discussed very early on, and sometimes even in one particular team, it's a quite, I'll elaborate a little bit further. Let me just check on time. Okay, that's fine. So the team had a challenge. Their database, it was a search problem. And the team then said, we want to make search faster, because what we are seeing is, over time, search is degrading as our data set grows, our database grows, our customers grows, and so on. So what the team did was, they almost did a a spike sprint to say, okay, we know there's two designs here. We can either optimize the current database, but we're not sure how far we can optimize it, or actually, we've seen in the industry that people are using Postgres as another database. So almost presenting that, back to the product owner to say, okay, I know you've challenged us to make search faster, but we are now presenting back to you two ideas which we need to discuss in a group, and we'll need investment. And what the product owner then came back is, okay, I'm going to give you, sprint each to test out each of these ideas, and can you, before you do that, visualize to me what kind of outcomes it will drive. We did that. We presented outcomes in terms of, if you move to this model, this is the improvements we could potentially make. If you move to this model, this is what it would give. We ran both those spike sprints, and what we found is Postgres solution was much faster and also much scalable. But even better, it was easier and more extensible to develop with. So in that situation, it is more of a team thing, and it's looking at the quality attributes of search, which was all about performance, which then drove that decision. In that aspect, what the quality engineer added value was, of course, how do we measure performance? And initially, when we started the discussion, it almost is, what level of improvement is good? Do you want it, 10 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds? How do you quantify the improvement? And of course, to get it down to sub-millisecond, the investment was much higher. It's almost like an exponential return curve. And the quality engineer is helping define those metrics, which kind of drive out the behavior tests, and then ultimately the engineers are hitting those targets. Hopefully that helped answers Gia's question. Let me move on to Anmol's question, is how to implement a good strategy in fake agile or legend. Yes, I mean, we've all heard of the reverse pyramid, the ice cream cone, and so on. I would almost take it as, going forward view. So whatever is there is already there. It's really hard to change that. And also, from a development perspective, to go back and refactor code is a challenge. So I would do it as a going forward view, in terms of, there's code that's constantly being changed, amended, added. It's to take a view to say, on the first, on the scenarios that are coming through now, we are first going to adopt a light pyramid, and the light pyramid could be, almost take Mike Cohen's pyramid of, okay, we'll have some UI level tests, we have some service layer, and we'll have some unit level tests, and let's start baking that in. But what I also tend to find is, in legacy, and we tried this in that bank organization, is the first is the development environment needs to be right. The pipeline needs to be right. So for example, if you're writing code in a legacy code base, how can you get a unit test framework up and running? It's really a challenge. And actually, if you can't do that, what is the next level up, that the layer up that you can introduce to put a wrap around that unit level test? So it becomes kind of a developer IDE problem. So how can I set up my IDE to enable me to write unit tests quickly, efficiently, and then get that fast feedback going? Secondly, as you move on to the kind of service layer test, it's almost going to using that table to say, actually, a good point. Let me just go back to that table. Right. So it's using this table to say, right, I'm going to introduce some integration level tests. What's my approach going to be? Am I going to use a framework? Am I going to use a tool? Am I going to do it manually? What kind of environment do I need? Do I need the full integrated environment? Can I use strobs and drivers? Can I perhaps use Postman to get around some of these problems? What's the data set I need? Do I need real data anonymized? Can I get away with mock data? And so on. And again, you're always thinking about, where in my pipeline am I doing this? Am I doing it as part of my in-process pre-build test, or am I doing it as a post-build out-of-process test? and always taking a view. I mean, I do have a slide which I didn't present. There it is. Yeah, it's, I may start with a test which is nearer to production, but then how can I drive that test lower level? Because the more left I shift it, the quicker the feedback. But again, it's not just about testing. It's the whole DevOps environment. It's about the framework, the tools that enable that. So hopefully that was Anmol. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of insight there. Yes, Geir, happy to pick up your point separately to give you a little bit more tips. But in the interest of time, let me hand back to Billy to wrap up. But feel free to ping me. My email is on the slide deck. Yeah, ping me an email if you want further help or questions. I'm happy to debate. Let me hand back to Billy to close off then.
Well, thanks very much, Jitesh. You can see from the questions that were asked and the comments that are flying through the chat, that was really well broken down. You put it into context, you shared examples. So yeah, we're really appreciative of that insight that you gave. A huge thank you for putting this together and being involved in Quality Advocates. Just to let everyone know, the session is recorded and in the coming week will be up on Expertise Recruitment's YouTube page, which I'll post on the meetup group. Jitesh, would it be possible for you to share your slides at all?
Yeah, no, not at all. Absolutely, brilliant. Yeah, I'll send it over to you. Yeah, and anybody who wants, copy, just ping me a mail. I'm not precious about these things. It's out in the public domain.
Awesome, that's great. Well, thanks very much everyone for coming along. Thank you, Jitesh, for being in today's discussion, and have a great week and weekend, everyone.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Billy.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.